Hey guys, this is Drew with the Travel Nurses Guide. I know there's lots of misconceptions out there about the 50-mile rule. I've heard all kind of misconceptions. I don't even want to start mentioning all of them because I don't want to confuse you. But during this video, I want to explain the 50-mile rule. I want to explain all the mileage rules. I know I've heard the rules about hospitals having mileage rules, agencies, and the IRS. And some of this is true. I'm going to explain each one of these, and I hope it really clears up some of the misconceptions out there. To start with, I'm going to explain probably the easiest one to explain, and that is the hospital. Some hospitals, not all hospitals, will have what they call a 50 or 75 mile radius rule, and that basically is exactly what it sounds like. If you live within that mile radius of the hospital, then that hospital would not allow you to work for them. So like I said, pretty self-explanatory there. And the reasoning for the hospital having these rules has nothing to do with taxes, stipends, or even the IRS. The reasoning behind hospitals making these rules is because they want the nurses that live close by to the hospital that are 50 or 75 miles away, they want them to be full-time employees of this hospital. They do not want these nurses working as travelers or contract for this hospital, because the hospital would much rather them be full-time. I'm sure it's a little cheaper, plus they have a more consistent employment as well versus the the contracts. Contracts are kind of short-term versus having a full-time employee. So that pretty much explains the hospital's mile radius rule. Next up, we're going to start with the IRS and what they say about distance. This is kind of where the 50-mile radius or the 50-mile rule comes from. However, a lot of people have mentioned, there's no such thing as the 50-mile rule, and that's true. The IRS actually never mentions in the tax code 50 miles is what it takes to be far enough away from your tax home to receive stipends. What the IRS actually says, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but basically, and this is my words of what the IRS says. It says that the distance must be far enough that one must stop and rest during the commute to meet the demands of the work. So as you can tell, it never mentions an exact mileage. And the reason behind this is the IRS wants to leave it kind of vague for that exact reason, because they realize that a 50-mile commute in South Georgia, where I'm from, might only take 45 minutes. And that's very doable. A one-way 45-minute commute is pretty much doable for most people every day. However, a 50-mile commute in Los Angeles, California, never been to California, but I've heard traffic is awful in LA, and I could possibly see that commute being 3 hours. 3 hours one way is not too reasonable. When you're spending 6 or 6.5 or more hours commuting to and from work every day, it just becomes unreasonable. And the IRS recognizes that commute distance in different areas is different. So they actually do not mention a specific distance. However, the IRS does care about how far it is and what type of commute you have. So one thing I tell people is really ask yourself, if you're wondering, is my contract hospital far enough away from my home? Think to yourself, if you were to get audited and you had to prove to the IRS that your commute every day to your contract was unreasonable, do you think you could prove to the IRS that your commute was unreasonable? So that pretty much explains that, I believe. And last but not least is the agency. A lot of times the agency will say, as long as you're 50 miles away, we'll pay you stipends. And this actually comes from the IRS tax code. This is a misconception or a misunderstanding of the IRS tax code. It does mention 50 miles at one point in the tax code, but it was misunderstood, and a lot of travel nurse agencies have kind of accepted 50 miles as a general guideline, and it has been accepted by lots of agencies and travel nurses. And so now a lot of people just think, oh, if I'm more than 50 miles away, I can receive stipends and I am good. So yes, the agency often does use 50 miles as that guideline, so that if you live 50 or 51 or more miles away from your tax home, or if your contract location is 50 miles or more from your tax home, then according to the agency, you are eligible for stipends. And yes, maybe the agency is comfortable paying you stipends if you live only 50 miles away. However, that might not satisfy the IRS and might, at the end of the year, come tax time, might get you and the agency in trouble. It all goes back down to, is the commute or is the distance far enough that it is unreasonable? So I believe that is about it. One more thing I wanted to add. I know someone mentioned recently that they lived 51 miles away, but their agency was not paying them stipends. And that is up to the agency's discretion. If the agency is not comfortable paying them stipends because they live 51 miles away, that is completely okay. In the end, the agency gets to make that decision. If they're not comfortable paying stipends because you live 51 miles away, maybe your commute was 51 miles but was only 50 minutes, which is pretty reasonable for a one-way commute for most people. So in the end, it is the agency's decision, because if you get in trouble with your stipends, more than likely the agency got in trouble first. So the agency kind of does look after that. Some do, some don't. But I hope this clears things up. I hope this gives you a better understanding of all the mile distance rules and why they're in effect and what they mean. Thank you.